Farmers in India rise against the government over three controversial new bills. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. If you have been even remotely active on social media, you would have been flooded by infographics and news headlines about how the Indian government has undermined the well-being of their farmers, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But before we even get there, I think that itself is very interesting. The shift in content on social media. It used to be very much centered around memes and cat videos, but now you're getting a lot of your news from it. I'm not too sure when this first began and when it was expedited, because the quantity or the ratio of what you would call fun content to newsworthy politics stuff has definitely increased as of late. And what are the consequences of that on society? What happens when Instagram or Facebook becomes your predominant means of getting informed? We'll see very soon, I assume. The consequences of this are going to be interesting, to say the least. Things like fake news infiltrate everything, and this is no exception, as we'll see near the end of my conversation. But before we get to any of that, let's begin by outlaying the issue. Three bills that the Indian president gave approval for are causing the division that we see between the government and farmers. These bills that were put forward are the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act, the Farmers Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act, and the Essential Commodities Act. So these three things here are the cause for all the trouble that we're seeing. Let's begin by breaking them down so you get an idea of what exactly each of these things are. Because once again, one of the cons of social media is the incentivization of clickbait and short headlines. So you might know there's an issue, but I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people wouldn't be able to tell you what these three bills are and what they do exactly. They just know there is some uproar and some chaos. So the first one, the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act. In a nutshell, within certain regions, there were these areas selected by the Agricultural Produce Market Committee that determined when, where, and how you could sell your goods. The bill seeks to remove some of these trading barriers and allow trades to happen online, on factory premises, warehouses, etc. The bill also takes away the local government's ability to put fees onto farmers who trade in these newly available ways. So prior to that, there was that committee, the Agricultural Produce Market Committee, and they laid some of the groundwork for what was acceptable and what wasn't. And you had the local government able to supplement that if they wanted to in their particular region. Now, it seems to me the issue here is fundamentally rooted in competition and whether or not it's a good idea to enter into a state of interstate free trade. Before this bill came out, you had these regulated markets controlled by the committees and local governments who could make moves to influence outcomes, and they typically did that on behalf of the local farmers because they didn't want to sabotage their local production. It would be bad for their local economy, their local citizens, and the local market in general. But now the Indian president is trying to view things through a more federal lens, looking at India as a whole. Now, of course, when you do that, you run the risk of forsaking the local farmers, and that's one of the issues here. With these changes, on one hand, you get something like economies of scale. The biggest farmers or the corporations will be able to provide to more people now. They can set up in one area and not be hindered by the local rules and the committee guidelines. These smaller farmers, though, will likely get priced out. It looks to me to be something like a Walmart versus the mom and pop store situation. The giants will come to play, they'll take over the local environment, and the local farmers will be left with nothing. That's one possibility. Now, prior to this bill, local governments and the Agricultural Committee could stop that. They could sway the markets in a way that favored local produce, and I imagine there are a multitude of ways you can go about that. Perhaps only allowing trade locally. You can't do it online like what the bill is proposing. Perhaps they're adding extra fees if you choose to ignore the committee guidelines, etc. But now, the markets are set to be unrestrained, becoming more free. That doesn't always mean good for every party, though. I'm sure it's probably good for the corporations, probably for the government, and you could even argue good for the citizens, but the farmers, the local ones, definitely not so much. I also assume things could go in the reverse of the Walmart situation as well, where large farmers from different provinces price out the smaller farmers that are local, making them go under, And after they get rid of the competitors themselves, slowly prices rise again because an oligopoly is likely to fill the void. So at the very beginning, these larger firms and farmers and corporations can price very cheap because they have the resources, the economies of scale. Now, the other farmers can't compete. They will go out of business because no one will buy from them. But once those guys are gone, what is the incentive now for the corporation to keep the price low? There actually isn't one because there's no competitors to undercut them. They can start slowly raising it every year, and before long you may end up in a worse situation than you were in originally with the local farmers. It's happened in Canada before actually with telecommunications. Rogers, Bell, and TELUS. It's a facade of competition, but really it's corporate collusion. In Canada, we have some of the highest telecommunication costs in the world. Now you can imagine if an oligopoly forms in the India farming market, something like that could happen. So there has to be additional forced forethought and protections put in place to ensure they don't end up in a similar rut. When an oligopoly or a select few corporations take control, then the argument of it's good for the citizens vanishes because now the competition is no longer there. You could make the argument that something like Walmart hasn't reached that level because there are competitors and therefore they're forced to keep their prices low. But when you kill competition, putting forward a bill in the name of free trade and whatever you want to call it that leads to this outcome, that's good for virtually no one except for these select few companies. Like in Canada, it was great when the telecommunication industry was limited to just Rogers, Bell, and TELUS for only Rogers, Bell, and TELUS. Everyone else literally suffered. So, the one thing to keep in mind there. Now, I will say though, this bill to me is not pure evil. One of the caveats here is that I don't fully understand where the Indian government stands in terms of transparency and trust. Perhaps the citizens are wondering if ulterior motives are bundled into the proposal, or perhaps the government's a little bit more corrupt than you would want. I don't know about those local determinants, but at a face value level, simply looking at the bill, it's debatable. Certainly bad for local farmers, but depending on how things play out, it could perhaps be good for people, or it could not be. There has to be more discussion and debate into it. Now, the next bill. It's called the Farmers Agreement on Price Assurance, and essentially what happens here is that it makes it so farmers need to establish contracts with buyers before producing any produce. The Indian government says that this can help small farmers because now they're going to be engaging with firms and wholesalers contractually. That allows you to sell the rights to future farming products and hold both parties accountable. I presume, though, that it's the difference between me walking over to the market with, say, 10 units of corn, trying to sell that on the spot, versus having an arrangement in advance, telling a company, on this date, I will have 10 units of corn, and you can pay me now for it, or perhaps even next year, I'll have this many units of corn, and we can work out an arrangement like that, versus me having to have the products on hand right away on that spot to get paid. The act does include, though, a 3-level dispute system where farmers and buyers can go to if the contract they agreed to is breached. If, for example, the buyer pays for 10 pounds of wheat, but the farmer only delivers 8, you go here, to the dispute system. Then, of course, if the farmer, for example, agrees to be paid $5 per pound of wheat, and they deliver, but the buyer only pays you $3, they try to shortchange you, you go here as well, to the dispute system. This is where things get very dicey though. Many critics and farmers say the appeal system favors the corporate buyers heavily. In this new system, farmers don't have the resources or time to go through a 3-layer appeal system. They might not even get through the first layer. If they don't get properly paid, for example, if the corporate buyer is shortchanging them, that's game over for their farming practice. They will not be able to sustain themselves. The corporate buyers, though, on the other hand, they can wait things out as long as they like. A 3-layer system doesn't really bother them. Imagine the bureaucracy too with that. How long it must take for a farmer to get through the system. At level 1, then you escalate to level 2, then to level 3, and after all that time, you're out money. Money that you need to survive, so Very controversial, and I can see why. Prior to this new system, I guess it was easier in a certain regard because without contracts, I could just show up with my goods to the market and you pay me what I want then and there. Or else I'll find someone else. So you don't have to do anything. There's no contract there. The contract comes with a degree of trust because now we're dealing with the future. I tell you on this day, I will have that much corn or whatever. And you tell me, for that, you'll pay me this. But if you lie, and we get into a situation like that, we go to the tribunal, the farmer will not survive that encounter. In fact, they'll be crushed, and maybe that's one of the outcomes intended with the bill. It's definitely very sketchy. The local farmers as well are also complaining that the appeal system does not give them a pipeline to get to the court. They're worried that the appeal system is a whole different channel, and they would rather deal with judges than whoever is going to be a part of this appeal board. And I hear that. Perhaps given the environment and the terrain and the corporate landscape, the farmers are not comfortable engaging in these contracts where their very livelihood and future is on the line. They'd rather stick to the traditional way that works, where they're getting paid on the spot for their items and they're ensuring that there is money in hand. That is valid criticism for sure, and there is no doubt at all that the system does favor those corporations, and it's actually the same thing too in North America. The legal systems favor people with money. It's just a fact. If I'm a poor person and I try to go to court, who can I hire? A public defender? Even then, if it's not a criminal charge, who do I get left with? A lawyer I can afford? Maybe I can't even afford one. But a corporation, they have the best lawyers with the best connections and the best odds of success. It's not a fair playing field. Your resources will dictate how well you can do in the courts, and that's for sure going to happen here in the appeal system. If you watch the TV show Suits, I'm sure you're familiar with Harvey Specter. He's a big shot fictional lawyer. If a corporation can hire Harvey Specter to fight their legal battles for them, and you as a farmer can only hire Joe Blow down the block who just graduated fresh out of law school, who do you think is going to win that? It's actually the same principle too in Canada and America. Reputation, experience, and even your name matter a lot in court. So keep that in mind when you're critiquing the system here. It's definitely tilted in one direction. So now we move on to the third act that was causing controversy. It's the Essential Commodities Act. Now, this is actually quite old. It's not a new thing, but it was amended this year. This bill sets out to ensure the delivery of certain commodities or products, the supply of which, if obstructed, owing due to hoarding or black marketing, would affect the normal life of people. Now, essentially what that means is, if there is a product that people need, we are not going to allow a market drought to occur just because certain corporations or people are hoarding things or selling it on the black market. Now, to give some example, let's say that somehow I'm able to purchase all of the gas and oil on the Indian market. I can hoard it and jack the price up because I've effectively killed supply. There's a lot of demand for it. People need it. It affects your normal life, but you can't go to the gas station now and get it because they're sold out. You can come to me though, but I'm going to charge a premium. I'm going to add an extra $2 a liter onto that because of whatever I'm going to call it, the service fee or something nonsensical like that. Now, as a result, you're going to be screwed, and people who need it will probably not be able to get it. Since it's an essential good though, these oil and gases, the government can come to me and say we're not going to allow that, and they can force me to liquidate my supply to meet the market need. So how does that process work generally? If the state finds a shortage, they discover that the economy needs this, but they don't have enough of it right now in the market, they can go to these people and these entities and they can mandate that whatever stockpile they have is going to be released into the market right now. Holding anything beyond a predetermined quantity would be illegal, and government lawyers will crack down on you for that. If a supply shortage was happening, this forced liquidation is an attempt to bring things closer back to equilibrium. Now in 2020, the amendment that I talked about, it essentially allowed the government to delist certain items on this essential list. Cereals, pulses, potato, onion, edible oil seeds, and other stuff were within the first batch to be deregulated. So things that farmers are typically producing. That is the act in a nutshell, and I actually am not too sure what the controversy over that is. Being removed from the unregulated or being removed from the regulated list now allows you to theoretically hoard these things as much as you want because the government is not going to be able to knock on your door anymore and say, hey, the market needs those potatoes. We're going to force you to sell them. What is the consequences of that? Is this bill getting attention because it's part of the bundle? Or is there something specifically wrong with it? And that's actually a genuine question. Open to the audience to help me figure out. I was trying to think through it, but I didn't come up with a solid reason why this bill is very controversial. I feel like there's something there, but it hasn't dawned on me yet. The first one, I can very well see why farmers would be against that. The second one, of course, going through that legal structure system and contracts, that could be a big headache. This third one here, having those produces deregulated and not on the essential list, what is the issue there? I'm open to hearing it. But as you can see, that's the crux of the issue. To my mind, it seems like the second bill is the most controversial, forcing the farmers to go into these contract-based agreements that they don't want to. That's a big issue. And it could lead to many farmers not getting paid and dying out because they can't afford to go through that dispute system, the 3-tiered one. Now, I will say as well, it's possible that I missed some local nuance that makes certain clauses in the bills worse than others, but these should give you an idea of what's going on. From these measures and these 3 bills, we have reportedly seen the largest protest in history. Millions of citizens and farmers have taken to the streets to have their voice heard. So clearly, it looks like something more is going on behind the scenes here. And from what I heard, it's probably the government itself, people not trusting it, thinking there's something extra hidden, embedded in the bills that's going to cause massive issues in India's future. One more thing that might lead you to believe that is the government is actually telling people and promoting that these bills are meant to help farmers, but the farmers themselves don't think so. They don't see the value. And it's pretty funny when you're telling one group that something's going to help them, and they see it and they say, wait, what? No, it's not. Because these farmers do know their situation the best. They're living it out. And at the same time, it's either that the farmers and the citizens mistrust what is being laid out, word for word, or they believe what is laid out is not to be trusted word for word because something else is going on there. So it's either the bills are just plain not helpful and the government is just confused, or they mistrust it because they mistrust the government's intentions. And one of those two is probably worse than the other, but even that isn't entirely clear at this point. The farmers and the government are in discussions to try and find a compromise because you do need your farmers. I'm going to talk about that in a second. If a country's farmers stop producing, everyone would be in big trouble. So the government has incentive to figure things out, and the farmers want a good deal. That's fair. I want them to negotiate fairly and freely, and we'll see what comes out of that. I want to move on to a fake news discussion though, because that has infiltrated even this series of events. Now, the BBC reports a plethora, a large amount of fake posts being circulated on social media masquerading as fact. One of the more popular ones is a supposed screenshot of Kamala Harris chiming in, I believe it was on Facebook, condemning the Indian government and whatnot. But when you fact check that, it turns out it's a fake. Kamala Harris has not actually said anything as per this recording date. And now she might, given this new headline. People thought she did say something, but she didn't. So those avid supporters might hound her now to make a statement, and I'm pretty sure she will. But as you can see though, a fake thing meant to drum out outrage, and you have to wonder who is doing that actually. Why would someone go to the lengths of creating a fake post to drum up outrage? You see here Kamala Harris very hyped up, saying this is tragic and condemning it and whatnot. And that's the Vice President-elect of the United States of America. That's going to make you feel away. That's going to influence your thinking. If Kamala Harris is saying that, she's probably right? But it turns out it was a fake picture. And I will say, It's very easy to doctor these things. I was surprised by how easy it is to make someone look like they tweeted something. I'm not going to say how you do it because I think it's a bad practice, but I will say it takes no effort. You need zero coding skills or Photoshop skills to make it happen. If these are being circulated as true, and people are believing it, and it's not just Kamala Harris, there's a plethora of things being spread right now that are confusing people, that are making the outrage seem greater than it really is. That's not healthy, and detracts once again from the truth. What is real here? It is fairly safe to say that many farmers in India find the bill contentious. It's fair to say that many of them are protesting. That's been confirmed by various news reports, but some of the local social media outrage that you're seeing, that in fact may be doctored. The temperature might be at a higher point than need be. The reality could be at a 50, but based on what you're seeing on social media, you could be under the impression it's at 100. And I'm not saying that's the case in this particular instance, but that's what happens with fake news. That's what happens when someone behind the scenes is orchestrating a campaign to influence the masses, because that's what it is. Someone went to the extent of faking a Kamala Harris post and circulating it on social media, getting thousands and thousands of shares and retweets and whatever. And they're the ones who are orchestrating the agenda and the message. Now, this slipped by the radar because it actually fitted with the perspective that you held on social media, or that social media held in general, that condemnation was warranted, and seeing a Kamala Harris post about that, it just made sense. But what if it was the reverse? What if there was a large social media campaign underground that was put out there to make you feel like condemnation was not warranted? You had Kamala Harris, a Photoshop tweet, telling you nothing's going wrong here, everything is peachy. What are you talking about? The fake news of the reports saying the farmers are outraged or something like that. And that circulated. How many people would that confuse? And then you have two parties now. One party who's seen the other social media critiquing the bills and whatnot, and the people who saw the fake Kamala Harris tweet saying it's not a big deal. And they're going to clash now based on bad incentives, based on fake things circulating, taken away from the truth. That's a major issue. What I've just laid out to you is essentially social media in a nutshell. Whatever echo chamber you have chosen to trap yourself within, you're getting fed all the theoretical, agenda-based nonsense that comes with that channel. Whether you're on the right or the left, there is someone there who is orchestrating your feed. You're getting fed only one side of the story, and to assume it's entirely true is just crazy. Especially when we know how prevalent things like fake news is. I don't have data to back this up, but I would probably be willing to bet that every single notable event or thing that has happened in the past year has had elements of fake news incorporated into it. Whether it's COVID-19, you have the anti-maskers and whatever other conspiracies you have going on with that. We see here with the Indian protests, massive fake news attempts being made here. The election, whatever it is, fake news is a part of the ecosystem now, and we have to know that. And we need to hold social media accountable and figure out a way to move forward while still maintaining the integrity of what truth is. It seems like these echo chambers and interpretation and moral relativism have caused a massive downfall in this regard. In some ways, you can't even talk to people anymore because the very basis on which you stand has been altered. The very reality that you base your thoughts and your arguments on is seemingly becoming different for everyone. That's not a sustainable recipe for a country going to the future. Now, I'll close off just with some thoughts on farming in general. So I made the point that if the government actually reached a point where the farmers just stopped producing, everyone would be in trouble, and that's true. Think back to our human roots, and it's not even going that far back in time. You actually have two predominant ways of surviving when it comes to sustenance. It's either you are a hunter-gatherer or a farmer, or you can be a mix of both. If you're a hunter-gatherer, that means that every day you're waking up and you're finding basically things to eat. Whether it's you're picking berries or you're hunting game, that's the way things go. And finding a surplus in that situation is hard because things are not as systematic as you would hope for. Farming was actually something that propelled human civilization forward by tremendous leaps and bounds, because now not every family had to be out here hunting and gathering. Not every male who was of age had to wake up every day with his spear and bow and whatever to go and find game. Now you could actually have a farming class who just focused on farming. You could make an acre of land very productive. You could maximize your output and allow for other things to happen. Because you have the farming class now taking care of your needs and sustenance and whatever, you can have the ruling class and the political class and the artist and whatever else you want. You are free to do other things with your time because other people are supplying your basic needs for you, and they are rewarded with money. That's how things go. Farming itself is actually one of the core essential services of a country. If that sector were to collapse, or local farmers were to die out, or something bad were to happen in that industry, it'd be trouble for everyone, because where do you get your food from then? It's either you revert back to the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, or you start farming yourself, and that takes time. For you to become a farmer, there are many sacrifices that come with that. You will likely not be able to do your normal full-time job anymore, because you have to wake up very early to do whatever it is, water your crops, feed the chickens, whatever it's going to be. Then you're losing some of your leisure time too. Your life will be fundamentally different. I believe this happened it definitely happened in Russia, Soviet Russia, when they culled many of the farmers, and they actually brought about a massive famine because they underestimated the service that these people provided. If you get rid of all the good farmers and the efficient ones and the talented ones, who is going to be producing the food for you? People didn't understand that, and it led to massive issues, and I believe it happened too in Africa. I don't know if it was south or north, but there was a culling of farmers too. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the case was something like the farming class was doing relatively well compared to some of the other classes there. They didn't sit well with them. They actually went to some of these farmers and they took vengeance upon them. And what happened after that was the farmers didn't want to farm anymore. Then what happens? You enter a famine situation. A very bad thing to find yourself in. The main point I'm making here is that it's very easy to take these things for granted because we've grown up with a stable society, but if something were to go wrong in the farming industry, the very life you know would change dramatically. So it is something to be respected and held with a certain amount of reverence because things have not been this good for very long. And things can go back very easily. One flip of the button, one change of a policy, one group of very upset farmers could cause that. So one thing to keep in mind, and I'm sure the Indian government is going to find a compromise, and this is an example of the farmers positively using their voice. They have so much support from the global community and Indians in general. Now they're actually at the bargaining table, which I presume they weren't at before. When the government was making these bills, they likely did not consult the local farmers. They didn't care. But now they have to. And the local farmers know what they want. And they're having their voices heard, and they're negotiating. That's perfect. That's actually one of the ideal ways of resolving conflict in a democracy. To use your voice and the power of speech and get things going. And in that way, you could say social media has helped, but there are many cons as well that come with it. It's something of an experiment. We'll see the true positives and negatives of social media in the future. And I hope that the negatives don't outweigh the positives, because based on the trajectory we're going, things like polarization are going to be our undoing. They might help get this bill sorted out. But in the future, there could be many more consequences that come along with this ride. So, that brings me to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. They'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.